Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of the flagship Dominion's Wrath, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger on the main display, his four arms crossed behind his back in the traditional pose of Vorthak nobility, while his primary eyes studied the tactical readouts scrolling across the secondary screens. The planet looked peaceful, almost primitive from this distance. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 47 worlds for the Vorthak Empire. "All fleets in position, Admiral," replied Captain Nextall from the communications station. 3,000 ships across 7 battle groups. The humans appear completely unaware of our presence. Zethkar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his species. The humans had no idea what was coming. According to the Empire's intelligence reports, Earth had barely achieved interstellar travel. Their technology was centuries behind Vorthak standards. Their weapons were crude projectile throwers and primitive explosives. Most importantly, they had never faced a real enemy. The Vorthaks had studied human history extensively before this invasion. They knew humans fought among themselves constantly, but these were small conflicts using outdated technology. Nothing like the systematic warfare the Empire had perfected over 3 millennia. The humans had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, no gravitational weapons. They were, in essence, playing with sticks and stones while the Empire wielded the power of stars. "Begin the demonstration phase," Zethkar ordered. "Destroy their orbital installations first. Let them see the futility of resistance." The first wave of Vorthak fighters swept down toward Earth's defensive satellites. These crude human constructions barely deserved the name weapons platform. They carried simple kinetic projectiles and basic laser arrays that couldn't even penetrate Vorthak armor plating. The fighters moved in perfect formation, their pilots confident in their technological superiority. Lieutenant Kexmar piloted his fighter toward a cluster of human satellites orbiting above what the humans called North America. His instruments showed the primitive devices trying to lock onto his ship with their targeting systems. It was almost embarrassing how slow and clumsy their technology appeared. He triggered his plasma cannons and watched with satisfaction as the first satellite exploded in a brilliant flash. The other human installations tried to return fire, but their weapons bounced harmlessly off his energy shields. Within minutes, the entire defensive grid was burning debris. "Orbital defenses eliminated," Kexmar reported to the command ship. "Humans are completely helpless up here." On Earth's surface, General Sarah Chen watched the destruction of her space-based assets from the command bunker buried deep beneath Colorado. The loss of the satellite network had been expected, but seeing it happen still sent a chill down her spine. She turned to her communications officer. "Send the signal to all resistant cells," she said calmly. "Phase 1 protocols are now active. Tell them to remember their training." The communications officer nodded and began transmitting coded messages across multiple frequencies. Around the world, carefully prepared teams received their orders and began moving into position. The aliens might have superior technology, but they were about to learn something about human nature that no intelligence report could have prepared them for. Admiral Zethkar watched the planetary bombardment begin with professional satisfaction. The first targets were obvious: military bases, government centers, and major population hubs. The Empire's doctrine was simple and effective. Destroy the enemy's ability to coordinate resistance, then occupy the remaining territory with minimal ground forces. The plasma bombardment lit up the night side of the planet as Vorthak ships rained destruction on major cities. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, all the centers of human power were being systematically eliminated. Within hours, the primitive human governments would collapse, leaving the population leaderless and demoralized. "Sir," called the tactical officer, "we're receiving surrender transmissions from several human governments." "Ignore them," Zethkar replied without hesitation. "We are not here to accept surrenders. We're here to claim territory. Continue the bombardment until all military assets are destroyed." But the Admiral had made his first mistake. He was thinking like a Vorthak, assuming that destroying the obvious targets would cripple human resistance. What he didn't understand was that humans had spent their entire history fighting asymmetrical warfare against superior enemies. They had learned long ago that the real battle begins after the conventional forces are destroyed. In a suburb outside Denver, Maria Santos watched the alien ships pass overhead through her basement window. The house above had been destroyed in the first wave of attacks, but the shelter her husband had built after reading about alien abduction cases had saved her life. Now she waited, along with 40 other survivors, for the next phase to begin. The aliens had superior technology, but they were following predictable patterns. They bombed the obvious targets first, then sent in ground forces to occupy key positions. Maria had studied military history as a hobby, and she recognized the classic invasion doctrine. The aliens were good at conquering civilized enemies who fought by rules. They had no experience with humans, who had thrown the rulebook away. Her radio crackled to life. "Phoenix to all nests. The eagles have landed. Repeat. The eagles have landed." Maria smiled grimly and reached for her rifle. The aliens were about to get their first real education about Earth's most dangerous predator. The Vorthak ground assault began 12 hours after the orbital bombardment ended. Dropships descended through the smoke-filled atmosphere, carrying the Empire's elite shock troopers to secure strategic positions. These soldiers had conquered dozens of worlds, crushing resistance from species far more advanced than the primitive humans. Commander Veltar led the assault on what remained of Washington, D.C. His troops moved in standard formation, energy shields active, plasma rifles ready. Their powered armor made them nearly invulnerable to human weapons, and their advanced sensors could detect enemies through solid walls. The city appeared completely abandoned. Buildings lay in ruins, streets were clogged with debris, and no signs of life registered on their scanners. It was exactly what Veltar expected after such a thorough bombardment. The humans had either fled or died in the attack. "Secure the government district," he ordered his troops. "Establish a command post at the primary administrative building." The Vorthaks moved through the rubble-strewn streets with casual confidence. Their armor protected them from the harsh environment, and their weapons could vaporize any human foolish enough to challenge them. This was just another routine occupation of a conquered world. They reached the ruins of the Capitol building and began setting up their equipment. Advanced communication arrays, shield generators, and automated defense turrets transformed the area into a fortified position within minutes. The Vorthak Empire had turned conquest into a precise science. Veltar was examining tactical displays when the first shot rang out. The bullet struck his lieutenant in the gap between helmet and chest plate, a weakness in Vorthak armor that no human should have known about. The lieutenant stumbled backward, blue blood spurting from the wound, and collapsed behind a concrete barrier. "Contact!" Veltar shouted, scanning the ruined buildings around them. "Where did that come from?" His sensors showed nothing. No heat signatures, no movement, no electronic emissions. The shot had appeared to come from empty space. Veltar had fought dozens of species across the galaxy, but he had never encountered an enemy that could hide so completely from Vorthak technology. Another shot echoed through the ruins, and another soldier fell. This bullet had somehow found the tiny gap in the armor's neck joint, dropping the trooper instantly. Veltar realized with growing alarm that the humans weren't just shooting randomly. They knew exactly where the weak points in Vorthak armor were located. "Return fire," he commanded, but his troops had no targets. The enemy remained invisible, striking with precision and vanishing without a trace. 300 meters away, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison adjusted his scope and chambered another round. The alien armor was impressive, but every piece of technology had flaws. The Resistance had spent months studying captured equipment and alien corpses, mapping every weakness in their defenses. Morrison had been a sniper in Afghanistan before the invasion, and he understood patience. He had been lying in this position for 16 hours, covered in debris and thermal dampening cloth that made him invisible to alien sensors. His rifle was a modified Barrett .50 caliber, loaded with specially designed armor-piercing rounds. The aliens were good soldiers, but they fought like they expected their enemy to play fair. They had no experience dealing with humans who would wait motionless for hours just for a single perfect shot. Morrison squeezed the trigger and watched another alien drop. Then he triggered the small explosive charge he had placed in the rubble around his position and disappeared into the smoke and confusion. By the time the aliens reached his location, he was already setting up in another carefully prepared hide. The pattern repeated across the entire occupation zone. Alien forces secured strategic positions only to face attacks from enemies they couldn't see or track. Human resistance fighters emerged from sewers, struck from abandoned buildings, and melted back into the urban wasteland before the aliens could respond. Commander Veltar's confident assault force was reduced to half-strength within 6 hours. His troops were demoralized, jumping at shadows and firing at imaginary enemies. These weren't the primitive, helpless humans his briefings had described. These were predators who understood urban warfare better than any species the Empire had encountered. "Command, this is Ground Force Alpha," Veltar reported to the orbiting fleet. "We're encountering unexpected resistance. The humans are using unconventional tactics." Admiral Zethkar received the report with confusion and irritation. How could primitive humans pose any threat to the Empire's elite soldiers? "Elaborate, Commander. What kind of resistance?" "They're not fighting like any enemy we've faced before," Veltar explained. "They don't mass their forces or defend fixed positions. They strike without warning and disappear before we can counterattack. They seem to know our equipment better than we do." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "They're primitives with crude weapons. Increase security protocols and continue the mission." But Veltar was beginning to understand something that his superior couldn't grasp. The humans weren't fighting like a civilized military force because they weren't civilized anymore. The bombardment hadn't broken their will to resist. It had stripped away everything that held their violent nature in check. As night fell over the ruined city, the real horror began. The humans emerged from their hiding places like nocturnal predators, moving through the darkness with an instinctive understanding of stealth that no Vorthak could match. They had evolved from persistence hunters who could track prey for days across hostile terrain. Now they were hunting the aliens with the same patient, methodical precision their ancestors had used to survive on the African savanna. Corporal Zeknom was part of a patrol sweeping the residential district when the humans struck again. One moment, his squad was moving in standard formation through the empty streets, and the next moment, his squad leader simply vanished. There was no sound. No flash of weapons fire. The soldier was simply gone. "Squad leader," Zeknom called out, trying to keep the fear from his voice, "report your position." Only silence answered him. The other members of his squad moved closer together, their weapons raised and sensors scanning frantically. But their technology, so effective against conventional enemies, was useless against humans who had learned to fight without electronic equipment. The attack came from below. Humans burst from storm drains and subway tunnels, moving with coordination that spoke of careful planning and intimate knowledge of the urban environment. They carried crude weapons, knives, clubs, and improvised explosives, but they used them with devastating effectiveness. Zeknom fired his plasma rifle at a human charging toward him, but the energy bolt passed harmlessly through empty air. The human had somehow anticipated his shot and dodged at exactly the right moment. Before Zeknom could fire again, the human was inside his weapon's minimum range, driving a sharpened piece of metal through a gap in his armor. The pain was incredible. No enemy had ever gotten close enough to hurt him like this. Vorthak warfare was conducted at a distance, with energy weapons and technological superiority deciding battles before soldiers ever came within physical contact. but humans fought like wild animals, closing to hand-to-hand range where their natural aggression gave them every advantage. Zeknom fell to his knees, watching in horror as his squad mates were overwhelmed by enemies who seemed to feel no fear of death. The humans absorbed plasma bolts that should have killed them instantly, fighting on with wounds that would have incapacitated any Vorthak. They moved with a fluid violence that spoke of millions of years of evolution as apex predators. Within minutes, his entire squad was dead or captured. The humans had struck without warning, fought with impossible ferocity, and then vanished back into the tunnels they had emerged from. Zeknom found himself alone in the darkness, bleeding blue blood onto the broken pavement of a world that was nothing like what the Empire had expected. Back on the command ship, Admiral Zethkar reviewed the day's reports with growing concern. Ground forces were reporting casualties far beyond acceptable levels. Equipment was disappearing, supply lines were being disrupted, and morale was plummeting. The humans were somehow mounting an effective resistance despite having inferior technology. "Perhaps we should increase the orbital bombardment," suggested Captain Nextall. "Destroy more of their infrastructure to eliminate hiding places." Zethkar considered the suggestion, but something troubled him about the reports from the surface. The humans weren't just hiding, they were adapting to Vorthak tactics with disturbing speed. Intelligence indicated that they were already reverse engineering captured equipment and modifying their own weapons to exploit weaknesses in Empire technology. No, he decided. More bombardment will only create more hiding places. These humans fight better in ruins than in intact cities. "We need to understand what we're dealing with before we commit more forces." But the Admiral was already behind in a race he didn't know he was running. Across Earth, human resistance cells were sharing information, adapting tactics, and preparing for a prolonged conflict that would test everything they had learned about warfare over their long, violent history. The Vorthak Empire had conquered 47 worlds by fighting civilized enemies who respected the conventions of warfare. They had never faced a species that would hide in sewers, strike from ambush, and melt away before reinforcements could arrive. They had never encountered an enemy that grew more dangerous when its civilization was destroyed rather than less. As the first day of the invasion ended, both sides prepared for the battles to come. The Vorthak still held overwhelming technological superiority, but they were beginning to realize that technology alone might not be enough. The humans had something that couldn't be measured in weapons systems or energy output. The ruthless cunning of a species that had clawed its way to the top of the food chain on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. The real war was just beginning, and the aliens were about to learn why humans had spent their entire history perfecting the art of killing each other. They thought they were conquering a primitive world. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping in human DNA for millions of years, the predator that had never really been tamed by civilization. Tomorrow would bring new horrors as the humans began to show their true nature. The Vorthak Empire had made the fatal mistake of assuming that advanced technology made them superior warriors. They were about to discover that there was no more dangerous enemy in the universe than a human being with nothing left to lose. The second week of the invasion brought revelations that shattered every assumption the Vorthak Empire had made about human warfare. Admiral Zethkar stood in his command center, staring at casualty reports that seemed impossible. In 14 days of occupation, the Empire had lost more soldiers than in the previous 5 years of conquest combined. "This cannot be accurate," he muttered, reviewing the data for the third time. "These humans have no formal military structure remaining. How are they coordinating such effective resistance?" Captain Nextall approached with another troubling report. "Sir, we've identified the source of their coordination. They're not using our communication frequencies or any detectable electronic signals. Analysis suggests they're using primitive electromagnetic methods, radio waves that predate our monitoring technology. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in frustration. The Empire's advanced sensors were designed to detect sophisticated communication systems, not the crude analog signals humans had abandoned centuries ago by galactic standards. The humans were somehow staying ahead of Imperial technology by using methods so primitive that Vorthak systems ignored them entirely. "What else?" Zethkar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "They're learning, sir. Human forces are now using modified Vorthak weapons against us. They've somehow reverse-engineered our plasma rifles and adapted them for their physiology. Intelligence reports that they're also using our own energy shields, though we don't understand how they're powering them." The Admiral felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. In 2 weeks, these supposedly primitive humans had achieved what usually took conquered species months or years to accomplish. They were adapting to Vorthak technology faster than the Empire could adjust its tactics. Down on Earth's surface, the human resistance had evolved into something that would have been unrecognizable to the civilized world that had existed before the invasion. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked in a converted subway tunnel beneath what had once been Manhattan, surrounded by a laboratory that mixed salvaged human technology with captured alien equipment. "The plasma rifle modifications are working," she reported to Colonel Thompson, the resistance leader for the northeastern sector. "We've increased the power output by 30% and reduced the weight by half. The aliens build their weapons for creatures with 4 arms. We can make them much more efficient for 2-armed fighters." Thompson nodded approvingly. Before the invasion, he had been a lieutenant colonel in the Army Rangers. Now he commanded a force that included everyone from Navy SEALs to gang members, united by their hatred for the occupying forces. The social hierarchies that had once divided humanity had been burned away by alien plasma, leaving only the fundamental question of who could kill the enemy most effectively. "What about the shield generators?" Thompson asked. "Even better news," Elena replied, leading him to a workbench where several glowing devices hummed with energy. "The Vorthaks use a centralized power source for their shields. We figured out how to create portable units using human power cells. They don't last as long, but they're much harder to disable remotely." Thompson picked up one of the modified shield generators, feeling its reassuring weight. The Resistance had learned to strip technology from alien corpses with the efficiency of battlefield surgeons. Every dead invader provided weapons, armor, and equipment that could be adapted for human use. "How many do we have operational?" he asked. 200 units ready for deployment with more coming online every day," Elena answered. "But, Colonel, there's something else you need to see." She led him deeper into the tunnel complex, past workshops where former engineers and mechanics worked alongside gang members to modify alien technology. The Resistance had discovered that some of humanity's most effective fighters came from the criminal underworld, people who had spent their lives operating outside the law and weren't constrained by conventional thinking about warfare. They stopped at a secured chamber where Dr. James Chen, Elena's colleague from MIT, was studying something that made Thompson's blood run cold. On the examination table lay a Vorthak soldier, very much alive and conscious, though heavily restrained. "We captured this one 3 days ago," James explained clinically. "It's been very educational. The Vorthaks have superior technology, but their biology has some interesting vulnerabilities." Thompson stared at the alien prisoner, noting the fear in its multiple eyes. "What kind of vulnerabilities?" "Their nervous system is more centralized than ours," James continued. "A precisely placed strike can cause complete paralysis. Their exoskeleton is strong, but inflexible. They can't twist or bend the way humans can. Most importantly, they're not adapted for extended physical stress. Their cardiovascular system is designed for brief, intense efforts, not the prolonged exertion that humans excel at." The alien soldier made a chittering sound that might have been an attempt to speak. James ignored it completely. We've also learned about their psychology, Elena added. They've never faced an enemy that refuses to surrender or negotiate. Their entire military doctrine assumes that sufficient force will cause any rational opponent to submit. They literally cannot comprehend an enemy that becomes more dangerous when cornered. Thompson nodded slowly. The humans had indeed become more dangerous. When the aliens destroyed Earth's cities and governments, they had eliminated everything that made humans civilized. What remained was the core predator that had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. The Vorthax had tried to break humanity and instead had unleashed something far worse than what they had originally faced. How are our field teams using this information? Thompson asked. See for yourself, Elena said, activating a communications array. Phoenix Base to Hunter 6. Status report. The response came immediately in the calm voice of Sergeant Lisa Park, a former Delta Force operator who now led one of the most successful assault teams in the Resistance. Hunter 6 here. We just finished the supply depot raid. 17 tangos down, 0 human casualties. We're uploading tactical data now. Thompson watched the mission footage on Elena's screens. Park's team moved through the alien facility with a fluid coordination that spoke of countless hours of practice. They used a combination of stealth, speed, and overwhelming violence that left the defending Vorthax no time to mount an effective response. The humans struck from multiple directions simultaneously, using their knowledge of alien weaknesses to devastating effect. They targeted nerve clusters with surgical precision, exploited gaps in armor coverage, and moved with an unpredictability that confused alien sensors designed to track conventional military formations. Jesus, Thompson breathed, watching a human fighter drop from the ceiling directly onto a Vorthax soldier, driving a modified plasma blade through a gap in the alien's neck plating. They're hunting them. That's exactly what they're doing, Elena confirmed. Human evolution produced persistence hunters, predators who could track prey for days and strike when the target was exhausted and vulnerable. We're applying those same instincts to urban warfare. Meanwhile, in the ruins of Los Angeles, Master Chief Nathan Cross was putting those instincts to work against a Vorthax armored column. The former Navy SEAL lay concealed in the wreckage of an overpass, watching alien vehicles move along what had once been Interstate 405. His team of 12 fighters was spread across a 2-mile stretch of highway, each one invisible to alien sensors. Cross had spent months studying Vorthax vehicle tactics, and he had identified a crucial weakness. The aliens relied heavily on their energy shields for protection, but those shields had to be lowered momentarily when the vehicles fired their weapons. For that brief instant, the armored vehicles were vulnerable to human weapons. "All teams, this is Phoenix," Cross whispered into his radio. "Target the lead vehicle when it fires. You have maybe 2 seconds before shields reactivate." The alien column was responding to reports of resistance activity further south, moving in the standard Vorthax formation that provided overlapping shield coverage. Their commanders felt secure behind energy barriers that had turned aside the weapons of 47 conquered worlds. Cross waited with the patience of a predator that had evolved to track mammoths across frozen tundra. His ancestors had survived by understanding exactly when and where to strike for maximum effect. Now he was applying those same instincts to alien technology. The lead vehicle's weapons began charging, energy building in the plasma cannons mounted on its hull. Cross could see the slight shimmer as the shields prepared to lower for firing. "Now," he said simply. 12 improvised explosive devices detonated simultaneously beneath the alien column. The humans had spent weeks preparing the ambush site, burying charges made from alien technology modified with human engineering. The explosions were timed to occur at the exact moment when the vehicle's shields were down. The lead vehicle disintegrated in a ball of superheated plasma as its own energy systems overloaded. Secondary explosions rippled through the column as ammunition and fuel supplies ignited. Within seconds, the most advanced armored force in the galaxy was reduced to burning scrap metal. Cross didn't wait to admire his handiwork. By the time Vorthak reinforcements arrived, his team had melted back into the urban wasteland, leaving only destruction and the growing legend of human unpredictability. Reports of such attacks were reaching Admiral Zethkar with alarming frequency. The Empire's conventional military wisdom was proving useless against an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. Worse, the humans were growing stronger with each engagement, learning from their encounters and adapting their tactics with frightening speed. "We need to change our approach," Zethkar told his command staff during an emergency briefing. "The humans are not responding to standard conquest protocols." "Perhaps a demonstration of superior firepower," suggested the tactical coordinator. "We could destroy one of their remaining population centers as an example." "We've already destroyed their major cities," Zethkar replied irritably. "They don't seem to be demoralized by casualties. If anything, they become more aggressive when their civilians are threatened." Commander Veltar's voice crackled over the communication system from his position on the surface. His original assault force of 500 soldiers had been reduced to fewer than 50 effective fighters in 2 weeks of constant harassment. "Admiral, I must respectfully disagree with the current strategy," Veltar reported. "The humans are not fighting like any species we've encountered. They're treating this as a survival situation rather than a military conflict. They don't care about winning in any traditional sense. They just want to kill as many of us as possible." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Explain." "They're using tactics that make no strategic sense," Veltar continued. "Yesterday, a single human fighter sacrificed her life to destroy one of our communication arrays. She could have retreated and lived to fight another day, but instead she chose to die, taking our equipment with her. This morning, we found booby traps in our own supply depot. Traps that could only have been placed by someone willing to remain hidden inside for days, without food or water." Zethkar felt a cold realization settling in his mind. The Empire had encountered suicidal enemies before, but those had been driven by religious fanaticism or chemical manipulation. The humans appeared to be making rational tactical decisions that prioritized long-term resistance over short-term survival. They were thinking several moves ahead in a way that suggested a sophisticated understanding of asymmetrical warfare. "Sir," called the sensor operator from across the bridge, "we're receiving a transmission from the human resistance. It's being broadcast on multiple frequencies." "Put it through," Zethkar ordered, curious to hear what the primitives had to say. The voice that emerged from the speakers was calm and professional, speaking in accented Standard Galactic that suggested the humans had been studying Imperial communications protocols. "This is General Sarah Chen of the United Earth Resistance," the voice said. "We are transmitting this message to inform the Vorthak Empire that your invasion has failed. You may have destroyed our cities and killed millions of our people, but you have only succeeded in removing the restraints that civilization placed on human nature." Zethkar leaned forward in his command chair, intrigued despite himself. This was the first formal communication the Resistance had sent to the Imperial forces. "You came to our world expecting to find weak primitives who would surrender when faced with superior technology," Chen continued. "Instead, you have awakened something that your species has never encountered before. You have forced humanity to revert to what we were before we built cities and governments and laws. Persistence hunters who tracked prey across continents and never gave up until the target was dead." The Admiral felt an uncomfortable stirring in his mind as the words sank in. Human history was filled with references to hunting and predation, but he had assumed these were metaphorical descriptions of primitive behavior that had been abandoned with the development of technology. "We want you to understand something about human psychology," Chen's voice continued with chilling calm. "When you destroyed our civilization, you eliminated everything that made us merciful. What remains is millions of years of evolutionary programming that tells us to hunt, kill, and survive at any cost. You have turned Earth into the most dangerous hunting ground in the galaxy, and you are the prey. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the command ship in stunned silence. Zethkar realized that he was facing something unprecedented in the Empire's history, an enemy that became more dangerous when defeated rather than less. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're detecting massive movement across the planetary surface. Human forces appear to be massing for some kind of coordinated action." Zethkar stared at the tactical displays, showing thousands of heat signatures converging on Imperial positions around the globe. After 2 weeks of guerrilla warfare, the humans were apparently ready to escalate to direct confrontation. "Alert all ground forces," he commanded. "Prepare for major engagement." But even as he gave the orders, Zethkar suspected that the Vorthak Empire had made a terrible miscalculation. They had come to Earth expecting to fight civilized beings who respected the conventions of warfare. Instead, they had encountered something far more dangerous: humanity reduced to its essential nature as the apex predator of the most hostile world in the known galaxy. The real test was about to begin, and Admiral Zethkar was beginning to suspect that superior technology might not be enough to win a war against an enemy that had evolved to kill everything that threatened it. The humans were done playing defense. Now, they were coming to teach the Vorthak Empire exactly why their species had survived when countless others had gone extinct. The hunters had become the hunted, and Earth's most dangerous predators were about to show their true nature to an alien empire that had never faced anything like them before. The coordinated human offensive began at 0347 hours Earth Standard Time, exactly 3 weeks after the Vorthak invasion started. Admiral Zethkar watched in growing horror as his sensors lit up with attack vectors from every direction simultaneously. The humans hadn't just massed their forces, they had achieved something that the Empire's military analysts had declared impossible for such a primitive species. "Sir," the tactical officer reported with barely concealed panic, "we're detecting coordinated strikes on 17 Imperial installations across 4 continents. The attacks began within seconds of each other despite being separated by thousands of kilometers." Zethkar studied the tactical display, his forearms gripping the command rail until his claws left gouges in the metal. The timing was perfect, too perfect for a species that supposedly lacked advanced communication systems. Somehow, the humans had synchronized a planetary assault using technology that Imperial sensors couldn't even detect. "How are they coordinating this?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. We're detecting no electromagnetic signatures, no quantum entanglement communications, no subspace transmissions. Whatever they're using is completely outside our monitoring capabilities." What the Admiral didn't know was that humanity's greatest advantage wasn't technological, it was biological. Humans had evolved as pack hunters who could coordinate complex group strategies through subtle visual and audio cues that required no electronic communication. Combined with their primitive but effective radio networks, they had created a command structure that was invisible to alien technology designed to detect advanced systems. On the surface, General Sarah Chen stood in the command bunker that had been excavated beneath the ruins of NORAD. Around her, communications specialists managed the flow of information using a hybrid network that combined salvaged military equipment with ham radios, runners, and even smoke signals when necessary. The aliens had prepared to fight a high-tech war, but humans were proving that low-tech solutions could be just as effective. "Phase 1 objectives achieved across all theaters," reported Major Davis, her deputy commander. "The aliens are responding exactly as predicted." Chen nodded with satisfaction. For 3 weeks, human forces had studied Vorthak tactical doctrine, identifying patterns and weaknesses in their response protocols. The aliens were superior fighters when facing conventional enemies, but they were completely unprepared for an opponent that understood their psychology better than they understood themselves. "Initiate Phase 2, Chen ordered. "Time to show them what humans do to invaders." Across the planet, human assault teams began implementing tactics that would have been considered war crimes in any civilized conflict. But civilization had ended with the alien bombardment, leaving only the fundamental imperative to survive at any cost. The humans had embraced every brutal lesson their species had learned during millions of years of evolutionary warfare. In the ruins of Sydney, Captain Maria Santos led her team through the tunnels beneath what had once been the central business district. Her fighters moved with the fluid coordination of a wolf pack, each member understanding their role without need for verbal communication. They had practiced these movements in the sewers and subway systems of a dozen destroyed cities, perfecting the art of urban predation. "Target acquired," whispered Corporal Jackson, their scout. Through the thermal imaging scope of his modified alien rifle, he could see the heat signatures of Vorthak soldiers guarding a supply depot. 23 aliens in standard defensive formation, confident in their technological superiority. Santos smiled with predatory satisfaction. The aliens still thought like conquerors, setting up defensive positions designed to repel conventional attacks. They had no concept of an enemy that would spend days tunneling beneath their positions, emerging from sewers and maintenance shafts to attack from directions that their sensors couldn't monitor. "Remember," she whispered to her team, "no survivors. We're not here to take prisoners." The attack came from below and within simultaneously. Human fighters erupted from storm drains, ventilation shafts, and maintenance tunnels that the aliens had never thought to secure. They moved with the disciplined savagery of apex predators, using modified alien weapons alongside human ingenuity to devastating effect. The Vorthak soldiers tried to respond with standard tactical procedures, but their training had never prepared them for enemies that materialized from solid ground. By the time they understood what was happening, half their number was already dead or dying, victim to precisely placed shots that exploited every weakness in their armor. Trooper Kextarn found himself back-to-back with his squad leader, trying to maintain a defensive perimeter as humans swarmed around them like vengeful ghosts. His plasma rifle discharged energy bolts that passed harmlessly through positions the humans had occupied moments before. They moved with an unpredictability that suggested they could read his intentions before he acted on them. A human female emerged from a maintenance shaft directly behind his position. Kextarn spun to engage her, but she was already diving aside. Rolling between his legs and driving a sharpened piece of alien metal through a gap in his armor. The pain was indescribable. No enemy had ever gotten that close to him before. As his consciousness faded, Kextarn realized that these weren't soldiers in any sense he understood. They were hunters who had studied their prey so thoroughly that every movement was calculated to achieve maximum lethality with minimum effort. The humans had transformed warfare into a predatory art form. Within 6 minutes, the entire alien garrison was eliminated. The humans stripped the bodies of weapons and equipment with the efficiency of scavengers who had practiced the routine countless times. Then they melted back into the tunnel system, leaving only corpses and the growing realization that the Vorthak Empire was fighting something that existed outside their understanding of civilized warfare. Similar scenes played out across the globe, as human forces demonstrated tactical capabilities that shattered every assumption about primitive species. In London, a team of former SAS operators used modified alien cloaking devices to infiltrate an Imperial command center, eliminating the entire staff before their presence was detected. In Tokyo, human engineers turned alien energy weapons against the power grid of an occupation zone, leaving Vorthak forces blind and helpless in a city they thought they controlled. Admiral Zethkar watched the casualty reports stream across his displays with a growing sense of dread. In 6 hours of coordinated attacks, human forces had inflicted more damage than the Empire had suffered in the previous century of conquest. Worse, the humans appeared to be learning and adapting with each engagement, incorporating captured technology into their arsenal at an unprecedented rate. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving surrender requests from ground commanders in 14 sectors. They're reporting complete collapse of defensive positions." "Denied," Zethkar replied automatically, though his confidence was shaken. "Order all ground forces to fall back to primary defensive positions. We need to regroup and assess the situation." But even as he gave the orders, the Admiral knew that retreat would only provide the humans with more opportunities to study Vorthak tactics. These weren't conventional enemies who would be satisfied with driving off the invaders. They were persistence hunters who would track their prey until one side was completely destroyed. The retreat began 12 hours later, as Vorthak forces abandoned their advanced positions and consolidated around heavily fortified bases. The movement should have been a textbook example of strategic withdrawal, covered by orbital fire support and executed with the precision that had made the Empire's military reputation. Instead, it became a running battle, as human forces harassed the retreating aliens with a combination of conventional ambushes and psychological warfare that pushed Vorthak's soldiers to the breaking point. The humans had learned that their enemies possessed superior firepower but inferior endurance, and they exploited that weakness with ruthless efficiency. Sergeant First Class David Kim led a harassment team that shadowed a retreating Vorthak column for 36 hours straight. His fighters operated in shifts, maintaining constant pressure, while the aliens struggled to maintain marching pace with equipment designed for brief, intense engagements rather than extended operations. "Target their vehicles first," Kim instructed his team via radio. "Force them to march on foot. Their physiology isn't designed for long-distance movement." The attacks came every few minutes. Sniper fire that disabled vehicle drivers, improvised explosives that destroyed supply trucks, and lightning raids that eliminated rearguard units before vanishing back into the terrain. The aliens couldn't stop to deal with each attack without exposing themselves to larger human forces. But they couldn't ignore the harassment without losing equipment and personnel. Within 18 hours, the disciplined Vorthak withdrawal had degenerated into a panicked rout, as alien soldiers abandoned heavy equipment and fled toward their fortified bases. The humans followed like patient wolves, picking off stragglers and maintaining psychological pressure that prevented the aliens from regrouping. Commander Veltar reached the primary base with less than 30% of his original force intact. His soldiers were exhausted, demoralized, and haunted by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. He had fought campaigns across the galaxy, but he had never faced an opponent that combined such sophisticated tactical thinking with such primitive brutality. "Status report," Admiral Zethkar demanded, as the battered ground commander appeared on the communication screen. "Sir, we need immediate evacuation," Veltar replied without preamble. "The humans aren't just fighting us, they're hunting us. They've studied our equipment, our tactics, and our psychology so thoroughly that they can predict our responses before we make them. This isn't a military campaign anymore. It's an extermination operation, and we're the targets." Zethkar felt his primary heart skip a beat. "Explain." "They're using our own technology better than we are," Veltar continued. "They've modified our weapons to be more efficient for their physiology. They've turned our communication systems against us, using them to track our movements. Most importantly, they're not fighting like civilized beings. They're treating this as a species survival scenario, which means they'll never stop until every one of us is dead." The Admiral's mandibles clicked as he processed this information. The Empire had faced desperate enemies before, but never an opponent that improved with each defeat rather than weakening. The humans were somehow becoming more dangerous as the conflict continued. "Sir," the sensor operator interrupted, We're detecting massive human force buildups around all remaining Imperial installations. Intelligence estimates at least 200,000 fighters converging on our positions. Zethkar studied the tactical displays showing human armies massing for what appeared to be final assaults on Vorthak strongholds. After 3 weeks of guerrilla warfare, the primitives were apparently ready for conventional battles. The Admiral felt a momentary surge of hope. Surely the Empire's technological advantages would prove decisive in direct confrontation. That hope died as the first reports came in from the surface. The human assault on the primary Vorthak base began with an orbital bombardment using the Empire's own weapons. Somehow the humans had captured and modified Vorthak artillery systems, turning them against their creators with devastating accuracy. Energy beams designed to level cities carved through Imperial defensive positions with surgical precision. "How are they targeting us?" Zethkar demanded as his orbital sensors showed human forces using advanced fire control systems that should have been beyond their technological capabilities. "Sir," the tactical officer replied with barely controlled panic, "they're using our own targeting computers. Analysis suggests they've somehow accessed our tactical networks and are using our own sensors to guide their fire." The Admiral felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. The humans had penetrated Imperial security systems that were supposed to be impossible to breach. They were fighting a war using Vorthak technology turned against its creators, and they were doing it better than the original designers had ever imagined. On the surface, Dr. Elena Vasquez watched her improvised command center coordinate the final assault with satisfaction that bordered on fierce joy. The aliens had brought advanced technology to Earth, but they had never considered that humans might be better at using it than they were. 3 weeks of captured equipment had provided enough examples to reverse engineer entire weapon systems. "Plasma artillery online," reported her chief engineer, a former NASA technician who had learned to modify alien technology with the desperate creativity of someone fighting for species survival. "We have targeting solutions on all enemy positions." Elena smiled as she activated the firing sequence. The irony was perfect. The Vorthak Empire was about to be destroyed by its own weapons, operated by the primitives they had come to conquer. Human ingenuity had taken alien technology and made it deadlier than its creators had ever dreamed possible. The bombardment continued for 2 hours, systematically eliminating every defensive position the aliens had constructed. When the final energy beam faded, the human ground assault began with coordination that showcased everything they had learned about their enemies. Colonel Thompson led the main assault force, but he wasn't fighting like a conventional military commander. Instead, he had embraced the pack-hunting instincts that had allowed his ancestors to survive in a hostile world. His troops moved with fluid coordination, surrounding and isolating alien strong points before overwhelming them with concentrated force. The Vorthaks fought bravely, but they were facing an enemy that understood war at a level their species had never achieved. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who could track prey for days, think several moves ahead, and coordinate complex group tactics without technological assistance. Applied to modern warfare, these instincts made them nearly unstoppable. Admiral Zethkar watched the destruction of his ground forces with the growing realization that the Vorthak Empire had made a catastrophic mistake. The humans weren't just winning, they were demonstrating tactical superiority that called into question everything the Empire believed about warfare. "All ground forces are destroyed or captured," his tactical officer reported with a voice that shook with disbelief. "Human forces are now advancing on our landing zones." "Order immediate evacuation," Zethkar commanded. "All ships are to withdraw to safe distance and prepare for orbital bombardment of the entire planet." But even as he gave the order, the Admiral suspected it was too late. The humans had proven that they could adapt to any challenge, overcome any technological disadvantage, and turn every apparent defeat into eventual victory. They were everything the Empire was not: creative, resilient, and absolutely ruthless when threatened. The evacuation became another disaster as human forces targeted the retreating ships with captured Vorthak weapons. Dropships exploded before reaching orbit, and orbital platforms came under attack from surface-based artillery that should never have existed. The humans had learned to fight a three-dimensional war that extended from tunnel systems to orbital space. Within 72 hours of the beginning of the human counteroffensive, the Vorthak Empire's invasion force had been completely destroyed. Admiral Zethkar found himself commanding a fleet that had lost 90% of its ground forces and 40% of its ships to an enemy that had started the conflict as primitive natives with crude weapons. "Set course for Imperial space," he ordered his surviving ships. "Maximum speed." "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission from the human resistance." "Put it through," Zethkar said, though he dreaded what he might hear. General Chen's voice filled the bridge with calm authority that carried an undertone of barely restrained violence. "Admiral Zethkar, this is General Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. Your invasion has failed completely. Your ground forces have been eliminated, your technology has been captured and improved upon, and your fleet is in full retreat." The Admiral's mandibles clicked involuntarily as the human continued. "I want you to deliver a message to your empire," Chen said with chilling precision. "Tell them that Earth is now a forbidden world. Tell them that humanity has learned everything we need to know about Vorthak technology, tactics, and weaknesses. Most importantly, tell them that we are coming." Zethkar felt his blood turn to ice as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't just repelled the invasion, they had used it as a learning experience to prepare for interstellar warfare. "We spent 3 weeks studying your species," Chen continued. "We know how you think, how you fight, and how you die. We have your technology, and we've made it better. We have your star charts, and we know where your worlds are located. What you intended as a conquest has become a recruitment drive for the most dangerous military force in the galaxy." The transmission ended, leaving the Vorthak fleet to retreat into deep space, with the knowledge that they had awakened something that might prove unstoppable. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded everything in the Empire's databases: adaptability, innovation, and a level of tactical thinking that suggested they might be natural warriors superior to any species the galaxy had produced. Admiral Zethkar stared at the blue marble of Earth shrinking in his rear sensors and realized that the Vorthak Empire had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. They had come to conquer a primitive world and instead had created an enemy that possessed all their technology plus innovations they couldn't have imagined. The humans were no longer confined to their single world. They had ships, weapons, and most dangerously, they had motivation. Earth's children were about to take their place among the stars as the apex predators they had always been, and the galaxy would never be the same. Behind them, on the surface of Earth, construction crews were already beginning work on shipyards that would build vessels incorporating the best of human innovation with captured alien technology. The species that had evolved to hunt mammoth and survive ice ages was preparing to hunt across interstellar distances. The war was over, but for the Vorthak Empire, the real nightmare was just beginning.